Good morning. I'm Fenwick Huss, Dean of the Zicklin School of Business, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. In this series, we explore how businesses are responding to the pandemic, and today we have the opportunity to look at the aviation industry. Joining me from the Dean's office is Associate Dean Gwen Webb, who will moderate the question and answer period. We're delighted to welcome Shai Weiss, CEO of Virgin Atlantic, as our special guest today. Shai is a graduate of the Zicklin School of Business, and he will be in conversation with Larry Zicklin. Larry is the former chairman of Neuberger Berman. Larry is also an alum of the school and the school's benefactor. Larry also serves as a professor in our undergraduate honors program. Shai, Larry, welcome.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Fenwick.
Fenwick. Yeah.
So Shai, let me begin. Last 12 months, business as usual or anything going on?
Yeah, that's an understatement of probably my life. This has been nothing but bar remarkable on so many fronts. On most importantly for the company, and of course, more important than all of that, I think, for everyone around the world, right? Lives and livelihoods tremendously impacted. Aviation at the forefront, I would say, right behind, of course, the hospitals and the carers around the world and the frontline responders. But after that, we're kind of in the firing zone for dealing with this pandemic, and I'm sure we'll explore this from
Yes,
many
we
angles
will
today.
explore it. But let me begin by asking you about the journey from being a student at Baruch, as I recall, at the night school, to being the CEO of Virgin Atlantic. Tell me about that journey a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, right, all our lives are full of just stories and journeys. Mine began in Jerusalem, Israel in 1968. But I always had a fascination with the US and New York specifically, and made the pilgrimage and the journey after finishing my military service into New York in 1992. I came to work for the Ministry of Defense there, the Israeli Ministry of Defense in the daytime. And I was looking for, I knew about Baruch because there was already the gospel that if you came to New York and you had a job, you could find a pretty good school to come and do your finance degree. And, I finished my degree at Baruch, and then immediately afterwards got lucky enough to get into Columbia Business School. And from then on, got recruited into investment banking at Morgan Stanley. The job was in London, and of course, the rest is history. But I joined Virgin Atlantic in 2012 as a board member on behalf of the Virgin Group, on behalf of Richard Branson, and joined as chief financial officer in 2014. Then I was chief commercial officer. And then in 2019, I had 1 year of normal CEOship, and the past 14 months has been nothing but.
Well, let's explore that a little bit. Let's talk about Virgin Atlantic before the pandemic. What is Virgin Atlantic? How big is the fleet? How old is the fleet? What routes do you serve? What are your main routes?
Yeah, and so just a bit of, Virgin Atlantic, 36 and a half years old, founded by Sir Richard Branson in 1984. I think it was June 22nd. We are a long-haul only carrier that flies predominantly between the US and the UK, but we fly to other places, of course, China and India and Pakistan and the Caribbean. We are owned 51% by the Virgin Group and 49% by Delta Airlines, which of course many of you know quite well. We are a full service, omni-channel, with a very clear sense of what our vision is, which is to be the most loved travel company. And that is only possible to us because we have the most amazing people who provide the best service across the Atlantic. We have now, after retiring many of our 4-engine fleet, have the youngest fleet in the sky across the Atlantic. So we pride ourselves by providing a unique service. In 2019, we have about 3 billion pounds of revenues. We were just break even and about to become profitable again after some difficult years post-Brexit, the weakening of the pound, and many, many other things. But if you just want to capture Virgin Atlantic, we just want to be the most loved travel company, and the rest will follow.
When is the first time you get the early inkling of a pandemic? How does that happen?
You know, actually, I have a pretty detailed timeline, and I've collected a lot of kind of documents, but this one was very specific. I was in New Orleans. I'm a member of the board of Checkpoint Software, which is one of the largest security companies in the world. There was a big conference in New Orleans. It's probably around the 28th of January, 2020. And I already know that something is happening. Of course, all of us know, but I know because we fly to China, into Shanghai, into Hong Kong. And I know that there is difficulties with our crew feeling unsafe. And, health, safety, and security of our people and customers, no matter what we do, has got to be paramount and front of mind always. And I made a decision. I could, canceling a route is a big deal, or suspending a rule. I have never done that before. And this was now on the cards. And I decided to go one day early into the UK and go straight from Heathrow to our offices, which are near the Gatwick office. And we suspended flying to Shanghai on February 1, 2020.
Were you the first airline to do that?
Sorry?
Were you the first airline to do that?
We were one of the first. I think that weekend, there were a number of people doing it. I think the Europeans, we were in a position where in Europe, we were slightly ahead of the US in terms of understanding. It just went from east to west through Europe, of course, and then to the US. So we were slightly ahead of others, but took the decision to suspend our flying. And from then on, literally my days have been consumed with understanding the pandemic, responding to the pandemic, and really trying to ensure, and I say this with great trepidation, but ensure the survival of my airline, our airline, through this tumultuous time.
Did you get any pushback from the board when you suspended operations in Shanghai?
No.
Did you consult with the board?
I did not. First of all, the interesting point is, of course, we're owned 51% by an airline, and on our board are the most senior executives of Delta Airlines, which, by the way, is the most phenomenal run airline in the world. The best run airline is Delta. So yes, we probably consulted, but it would be very, very quick. We're a privately held company. We have become so much more agile through the pandemic, but we're pretty agile. We're low key. So information flow is very quick. I would have probably said, we're going to have to do this, and just did this, and probably just called the board and tell them that's what we're doing.
Did you have any idea at that point the implications of what was about to happen to you?
No. I think anyone who could foresee where we are today, and by the way, even today, I don't think we have the full, as evident by the recent activities we were talking in the preparation, just here in the UK, and of course in the US with the new administration. But to say that I, at that point on February 1, 2020, knew the extent of what was to come, no. I knew it was serious enough, as evidenced by my actions, not what I said, by my actions of coming a day early, taking a shower at the airport in one of our lounges. We have a beautiful arrivals lounge. So taking a shower, getting into a car, and going straight into the office, that tells you that I thought it was pretty serious, but absolutely no way did I get the full extent. That would have taken me a few more weeks and months.
You're in an industry that by its nature is financially leveraged, operationally leveraged. I imagine as the events began to unfold, you could see all kinds of disasters in front of you. The ability to meet debt repayments, the employee situation, union situation. Actually,
all of that is absolutely true. But can I actually start? At Virgin, we always start with our people. When I'm sure again we'll talk about reflecting what I learned 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and where we are today. But the first thing is that our people were getting nervous. They were flying in their minds. We were sending them to the pandemic to serve our customers, and to deal with that is the most humbling. And just, my top priority is to ensure that the safety of the people I put on a plane and the safety of the people who serve the people on the plane is my top priority. And when you run an airline, actually, you start every single day by that. Nothing else matters unless the safety, at any point in time when the airline is really fully operational, I have about 10,000 people in the air or about to go in the air, and it's my responsibility to ensure their safety. So that would be my first point of call. The second thing is, it was when this thing started to unravel further and we understood that there would be further curtailment of travel, and from April the 20th till 3 months later, we didn't fly one passenger. We owed passengers a lot of money. And the realization that the money I owed was greater than the money that I could just generate if everything stopped was, of course, a big financial question of how to deal with that. So our people, the safety of our people and our customers, and of course, just indeed the liabilities, but just understanding that this was to prolong, we needed to do something radical.
Just to make it clear to our audience, we're talking about refunds now.
Refunds, pure refunds. During this pandemic, we would
is
have
everybody entitled to a refund immediately?
Yes, well, in this situation, in the main, people are entitled to refunds. We've refunded over 600 million pounds over the past 12 months. So all our notions of what buffers for cash are, we run a tight ship financially. My origins are from the finance community. Of course, I'm now a CEO, so I've got broader responsibility. The cash, I remember that lesson, that class, the counting the cash and a 13-week cash flow and all the things that you do with turnaround situations, we put into force very, very quickly, forcefully. The team adapted remarkably well, but it was a shock to the system how quickly we need to do things that we had never done before.
Where does the 600 million come from? I'm assuming you didn't have 600 million in the bank.
No, we had a lot. We always run an airline always runs with reserves, and we ran reserves. Okay, now we're, so at some point I understand, the board and the shareholders understand that we need to do something radical, that this is a continuous situation. And I'm talking now beyond March and into April and May. And, on September the 4th, we completed our solvent, privately funded recapitalization of the company. So a lot of the cash comes from renegotiating with all our creditors, the people who lease us planes, the people that we buy services from, our landlords, we don't own all the property, the airports, but also the people we borrow money from, our shareholders. But before that, we took steps that showed that we were in control. And unfortunately, that came with a devastating loss of jobs. Over this period, we have cut our workforce by 45% from start to finish, not just one group, and cut our costs by 335 million pounds in 1 year. We shrunk the fleet, shut down Gatwick, or suspended our flying out of Gatwick, which is our second airport in the UK. So all that was stuff we started to do in March, and maybe I can say how we got to those decisions, but that's what we did before we went to the next phase, which was the recapitalization.
And 335 million was on a base of, what was your total expense base?
In terms of the pool we're talking to is about 1.7, 1.8 billion of the relevant expenses, because of course fuel we're not talking about, and many other things. This represents about a 20% reduction to our costs.
And how did you, when you laid off all these people, which must have been devastating to you personally, just personally, how do you make the decision of who gets laid off and who doesn't?
So first, just there are seminal moments in a company. And by the way, everything I've done in the service of our people, and I have just the most amazing team that have been through this crisis with me. There's not one individual can do any of this on their own. You have to do this. I know it's obvious, but for those, for the people who read the Jim Collins book and the various books, it is the people on the bus. And in March, I read on a Saturday, I read an article early on that was published by a scientist called Ferguson from Imperial College, the seminal paper that said that if there are two styles of either suppression or containment, or eradication of the virus, and if you did one or two, it doesn't really make a difference. This is going to cost a lot of lives, unfortunately, and it's going to be very, very long, and there's going to be two peaks. I read that on a Saturday. On Sunday, I wrote a one-pager. I always write only one-pagers in a very specific format, which outlined what we needed to do. And indeed, shrinking ourselves to the bare minimum was, and we, by the way, we did it in 2 stages. First was only about, I say, about 3,150 people, representing about 30% of our company. I did it. So we did the consensus. And then you just, once we agree on the target, it's handed over to each of the teams to do it. You know, it just cascades down and down and down. And we tend to do this on a zero-based approach. So imagine that we didn't have an airline and we need to build it from scratch. What would you do? And it's merit-based. So we try to ensure that the best people, and all our people are amazing, but you know, we had to make some tough decisions, and it had to be not just based on seniority, which is a traditional unionized workforce approach, and working with our unions hand in hand, we were able to find solutions for that. And then the last thing I would say, when we reached the conclusions of what the plan was, I got on a phone, on a call just like this, with 10,000 people. And at the beginning of this cycle, it wasn't clear that we can do this. You know, the technology, we were not clear that these technology existed, but it did exist. Cisco had it. Cisco WebEx can do, I think, 150,000 lines. And I said, I want people to hear it in my own voice, telling it to the company-wide that we would have to take dramatic steps, painful, unheard of, in order to survive and preserve the enterprise so that we can welcome as many of these people back when demand returns.
And you were able to get by the seniority issue with the unions.
Sorry, Larry, I missed that for a second.
You were able to get by the seniority issue with the unions, because I know seniority is usually
with our unions. You know, the ethos of our companies I mentioned is, you know, you take care of your people, they take care of your customers, and they take care of the bottom line, has worked throughout the years. Of course, we are always not in agreement, but this time they understood the magnitude of the issue, and they were very brave. They were very brave and understood that if we were to survive, we all had to work together, because actually what we needed to do was restructure the company, save as much money as we can, use the cash burn, and then of course, raise more capital. And that can only be done if we showed that on the other side of this pandemic emerges an even better Virgin Atlantic.
We talk about a better Virgin Atlantic. I think it would be interesting to share with our audience the news that you got this morning from the British government, to give the audience an idea of how quickly things are moving.
Yes. Okay. This morning, your time, and I think 12:30 our time. Okay, we were expecting this because we're always involved in these policies. But the UK government has just announced that as of the 15th, which has already been in the works, arrivals from what is called red countries, such as South Africa, Brazil, and many African countries, and all of South America, go into a 10-day quarantine. That was already expected, but they've now further emphasized that not only would anyone traveling from the UK and to the UK, but arrivals in the UK will test 72 hours before departure. And then when they return from even non-red countries, they will have to go to a 10-day quarantine and add two PCR tests. So tests that find the presence of the virus on day 2 and day 8. So a very, very draconian set of measures, which is all aimed to trace and contain new variants and strains of the virus. This is the big, I know it's in the US as well, but in the UK, everybody's very fearful that as vaccination is making good progress, that new variants which are not susceptible to the vaccine emerge and become the dominant strain. So de facto, that means that, as far as I can see, there's going to be very limited demand for travel over the next few months. And we will have to adapt our plans accordingly and ensure that, we are ready for the resumption of flying probably towards the summer now. So I think we're going to miss the Easter period, which was very important to us. And I think now a summer resumption is more realistic and accordingly planned.
That sounds like more refinancing, maybe more layoffs.
No layoffs, because no layoffs. We've gone deeper than any other airline, And it's important to say that we have what is called furlough funded by the government until the end of April. But I will do everything we can to ensure that we do not need to lay off further people, because we know that there is, the difference between where we are today and where we were last year is there is a vaccine. And while the tunnel keeps on elongating, there is light at the end of it. So it's a contained problem. But yeah, possibly more actions required to bolster up our balance sheet, which we will do, of course.
That's amazing. You mentioned you have the youngest or young fleet. What's the
Yes.
average age of your fleet?
So it's going to be around 7 years now. We're just taking delivery of A350s-1000s. That's an Airbus plane, fantastic plane. We've retired the 747s. The iconic Virgin Atlantic 747s have been retired. The last one, we have names for each of the planes. This was Pretty Woman. It's beautiful 747s with what we call the bubble, the second floor, which people actually pay extra money to sit in, but that's been retired, the last one in the UK. And then we have A330s and the 787s, and more new planes coming over the next 2 to 4 years, depending on how we deal with the deliveries.
I can't imagine what that financing is going to look like, because I assume most of the fleet is already mortgaged.
Most of the fleet is mortgaged, but you remember we play with, there is operating leases, of course, of people who buy planes and then we just lease them. And there are planes that we buy, but then we find finance lessors, so people who want to basically give us a mortgage on it. Indeed, every asset in our company, it's pledged on something.
What a way. I'm interested in the toll this takes on you, Shai. Everything's mortgaged, everything is subject to this morning's news. The government does this, the virus does that, a mutation occurs here. What is your life like? What is your personal life like?
I would urge everyone who has not seen, one of my favorite movies is Groundhog Day.
It's one
with
of
Bill
best.
Murray. Yeah, most of my days are the same, but none of them are the same. So in terms of what I do, I wake up early, I work out at home, I hit the computer, and I'm on calls with the teams, but I also manage to make sure that there is thinking time and writing time and communications time and just catching up with people up and down the company. But yeah, so how do I do this? I am trying to keep both mentally and physically strong. I usually have a positive, I don't call it optimist. I never talked about optimism or pessimism. I have a positive outlook. I am getting better at understanding what I can control and what I cannot control. And I'm trying to perfect the stuff that we control, knowing that, of course, we live in such a dynamic environment, and I refuse to be a victim of this situation. And at the beginning of this entire crisis, I dug deep to understand why should I be in this seat and how can I make a difference. And in order to understand that, I needed to understand what truly motivated me. And I must say, I reached 2 conclusions. I threw away money and ego, and I was left with our people and making sure that Virgin Atlantic survives for the next 36 years. And every day, that's the things that I remind myself of. And any temptation to think about anything else, I try to quash it as quickly as I can, not to let my own inadequacies and frailties get in the way of Virgin Atlantic's success.
Are you advantaged in some way by being owned by Virgin and Delta, as opposed to being a publicly held company and subject to shareholders who may or may not understand exactly what's happening?
Possibly, first of all, possibly, but I can give you a counter argument. Having an ability to tap the public markets would have been very, very helpful. So there's a very good thing that we don't have as a tool, which is public equity and selling rights, or rights offering or a share offering. But having a concentrated and a fully aligned ownership structure of the original founder, his name is on the door, and a partner in Delta that is not just an owner. We have a joint venture with them across the Atlantic. Airlines these days run on joint ventures. Just as American and BA have one, Delta and Virgin and Air France and KLM have a big partnership. So having people who trust you and you trust them, that you know them intimately well, and you know who you are representing, and they, I think, now have a high degree of confidence in our ability to do the right thing, or at least aim to do the right thing, of course, is super helpful. Our decision-making is very quick. We have less need, to do over syndication, just talking to people for the sake of talking to them. When we are talking, it's with a purpose and with an action-oriented environment that responds very quickly. So I would say we miss the public side. On the other side, having these types of owners that see the strategic long-term value is super important.
I assume between now and, you tell me when, the cash burn is going to be very significant.
Well, I would say that we have gone a long way, as long as you can, to achieving what we call, of course, net zero burn. For that, we need a bit of revenues, which we were on track to achieve probably in the next few months. It's probably going to be delayed slightly, given what we've talked about earlier and the demand and the decisions. But in 2021, our burn is dramatically lower than it was in 2019. And that's the benchmark for us. So we're doing everything we can to reduce our burn rate by, of course, containing our costs and then flying only cash positive flights. It's not the usual metrics for flying because you want profits. But in our case, the only thing we're managing for is we look at the profit and loss statement, but it doesn't really mean much. It's very ugly. It's negative hundreds of millions of pounds. And we look at it quickly, but actually the focus is literally a daily cash flow, 13-week cash flow, and then yearly cash flows. Just like you would learn in school right now, or in business school, or just by, working in a deli, as you did. Cash in, cash out.
Given what you're saying, I assume there's going to be a lot of casualties in the airline industry, and there already have been some casualties. Are we going to see a lot of planes on the market before very long?
I actually think that we may see a few more casualties, but I think most of the casualties have already occurred. We need to also put this in perspective. Not in the UK, we are an anomaly, but governments around the world have pumped over $200 billion and will go further in support of their aviation. The UK is a separate matter. The government here thinks differently about that. So there have been casualties. One of the big ones has been Norwegian, which is a big competitor of ours across the Atlantic. They're retrenching to the Nordics, and they have a very large fleet of very young planes, which will come on the market. But overall, yes, there will be more planes than you would expect in a normal situation. And it will take a bit of time to absorb those planes, if ever, because recovery doesn't happen overnight here. I think most of us believe that returning to 2019 levels of flying, which is our benchmark, will occur either in 2023 or 2024. And even that mix will be a bit different.
I'm assuming the mix will change because businesses have learned to operate without international or national travel. And I understand they're going to return to it, but perhaps not to the same degree.
I think that's right. But on the flip side of that, we've seen the nomads. There are 1 billion nomads in the world, people who just now can figure out that they can work from anywhere in the world. So there's going to be a leisure business travel. That's one thing. For the next 2 years, I'm sure that if I ran a survey for the people listening on the line right now, and I asked them, what are you missing? They'll say they want a bit of vacation and possibly a bit of travel, domestically and internationally. So there's tremendous pent-up demand for leisure and for leisure travel. And I do think that while we should assume that there is an inherent reduction in business travel, I think we're also now 1 year into this. We've learned that video calls, just as we're doing here, are fantastic. But on their own, I think we've exhausted what they offer us in terms of sparking innovation, real collaboration, and team building. It's okay for functioning teams, but teams that need to form and then storm, it's very hard to do just on video. It's possible, but very, very hard. So there's a new equilibrium. It's different. All of us know that there is a world that we have not yet lived in that is around the corner, and we'll adapt accordingly.
To what extent has freight offset some of the passenger decline?
Yeah, thank you for raising that point. So one of the things that we did very early on is, usually, first of all, we do have a thriving cargo business, but our cargo business is one that uses our passenger planes. So we reserve part of the hold for cargo. And lo and behold, in March, we decided that we will become a cargo only operator. So we're using passenger planes and filling them not in where the seats are, but in the cargo. We're optimizing for cargo. And because there was such high demand for equipment for the National Health Services, shipments of critical parts in electronics and just literally parcels, we were able to actually increase the revenues of our cargo operations in 2020 by 40%. So it would have been a record year. In many ways, that adaptation and going early saved our company as well. So what I'm trying to say is that there's not one single decision here that saves the company. It's the totality of evaluation. And there's probably 10, 15, 20 big decisions that we've all made and then executing them well that have ensured that we're still here.
So it pays to fly a plane with the passenger seating intact and just filling the hold with cargo.
Yes.
And no passengers. I assume that's from a cash point of view, not a P&L
Yes.
point of view.
Cash point of view, it pays well. That's because the rates have increased dramatically 2, 3, 4 times. And then on the back of that, because if we have a cargo that is going well, we can add a few passengers that normally we wouldn't fly, 10% load factors, 20% load factors, or as we're currently flying at 40% load factors. That's when we do cargo and passengers. But in 2020, we had 4,000 a sector being departure and landing of cargo only operations, 7,500 tons. And on the weekend, out of Norway, we never fly out of Norway, we flew fresh fish into the UK and achieved a record of tonnage, 50 tons of cargo on a passenger 787 plane, Boeing 787, which is only a quarter of a cargo only 747. Just to tell you, it's just very dense. The fish are very dense, so it works well and you can package it nicely. But this is where people innovate and find different ways of operating. And they have really, our cargo team has done a fantastic job serving, of course, their customers, but also helping Virgin Atlantic survive.
I never talked to a CEO who knew so much about fish. But I guess you learned. And what did it take for you to gear up to do this? And how quickly was that decision made?
Again, I remember I was there just when one of our guys, Steve Buckerfield, who's our cargo salesperson, he was on the phone. I heard him literally talking to one of his counterparts and starting to talk about what could we do. Can we just sell you our planes for cargo? And I could hear this I was just there by coincidence, just walking around as I used to do, because we're not in person any longer. So they started and they literally went after this. And of course, we started to help our National Health Service. And, it starts to go further and further and further. And now we already have a dedicated business. But that dedicated business, I mentioned 40% growth in 2020, where everything else is declining by 80 or 90%.
And do you think that continues? You think that you will continue to have that emphasis on cargo?
No, because I actually wish, my answer is, I hope not. I really hope that we are not talking about, I know they're going to do a fantastic job in 2020 because it's already set, 2021, because it's already set, as I mentioned, that passenger is going to take some time to recover. But my job is to ensure they go back, is actually reduce their revenues.
I got it. Shai, I understand your thoughts and expectations for 2021, but these mutations cast a pall over that, I think. Even as people are vaccinated, we don't know quite the extent that eliminates the risk of these various mutations. I assume that's going to slow down passenger travel, no matter
Oh, no
when it
doubt.
begins again.
Yeah, so when we did our solvent recapitalization and completed it on September the 4th, we prepared for a very severe downside case, which was basically that our revenues in 2021 would be 50% of 2019. And that would assume that passenger flying would really start after or around Easter between the US and the UK. It is now not going to happen. So
I
it's going
assume
to take.
that's your heaviest route.
The US is our heaviest route, but it's also now that during this pandemic, we've actually added more into India and Pakistan and other places in the Caribbean. So I expect now there will be a dampening on demand. We're expecting the summer still to be our new plan, or basically our expectation is that the summer is still a viable option. Initially, if you asked me in November, I would have said that recovery starts in December. I now think that recovery starts in June, May, June.
I want to quote to you what Herb Kelleher, who was, I think, the founder and CEO of Southwest Airlines, once said. He said, you can't have a midlife crisis in the airline industry because every day is a crisis. How do you manage? I mean, it seems to me you're working the high wire with no safety net underneath. You're leveraged, you're refinancing, everything is mortgaged, traffic is down. How do you handle it day to day? I know you have a routine you've gone through, but you face a crisis every single day.
Yeah, we do, and I do. But I think what you would, by the way, that quote is a very good quote. And of course, Southwest, what a company. We're admiring them from a distance. But the other quote is, airlines is the ultimate team sport. So anybody who loves sports or working in a team as a proxy for not being a great sports person, go choose an airline. Intellectually, the most rewarding, the most challenging, and has a great sense of purpose if we do this environmentally friendly, if we do this well, if we do this in accordance with the times. I just, actually, for me personally, the more difficult it becomes, the better I become. I am not good at just, some people are very good at the status quo. I'm not a very good I'm very impatient. That's one of my flaws. I'm always action oriented. So an airline and I are a match made in heaven.
What are the precautions you take now for your crew and your passengers as each one is loaded onto an airplane?
Well, we have, we call it fly safe, fly well. That's our, the mantra. Of course, many others have copied that. And between the fact that we were the first to test our cabin crew before on site, we literally found systems which were not PCR. Again, that technology is not as widely used in the US. It's called LAMP. So we started to test our crew. We measure our satisfaction scores, but we added a very specific measure. Cleanliness we always had, but literally we measure and ask our customers to tell us how clean the bathrooms are. We, for each, we do a deep clean. We provide every passenger that comes on board a pack, a health pack with a mask and cleaning materials. And we just know that this is our responsibility to take care of our passengers. And by the way, it's proven that airlines and travel have not been a source of infections. Actually on a plane, it's been very safe. The filters on the plane are the best ever, and they replace the entire and clean the particles within the air every 2 to 3 minutes. So the whole system is geared towards health and safety of our passengers and crew. And I think we have a very good track record of proving that is possible.
And you have evidence that the infection rate on planes is lower than normal?
Oh yes, but it's not what I say. Look at what the Mayo Clinic is saying. Look at import. At the beginning, people were fearful of importation. Indeed, importation did and could happen. But now every passenger, by the way, in a Virgin Atlantic, not every cabin crew, everybody who leaves and comes on a plane has been tested for COVID-19. So that just tells you where the starting position is. And I think testing will be with us for a very long period of time. We're geared up towards that. We're working with other providers also to make it more digital so that people will know where to get vaccinated, where to get the authority they've been vaccinated, but of course, where can they test and how do you present an authentic test result to the airline so that we can board you safely on board. But the research that has been done is, I think, conclusive that travel is not the source of the spread of the disease.
And is that true of the airports also?
Yeah, look, if everybody, as long as people adhere to the rules, wear a mask, socially distance, wash your hands. But of course, this will be a receding issue given the fact that vaccinations are, at least in the US, of course in the UK, Israel as well, are at the forefront of increasing the reach of the vaccinations. And I think we'll find that probably by this spring and summer, many of us would have been, definitely in the right age cohorts, would have been vaccinated. And we will have a greater handle on this pandemic. The big thing that we all need to learn more about is, as I mentioned, strains and variants. That's where the efficacy of the vaccines against those variants. That's the next thing. And of course, there is also a risk, a balanced opinion between the scientists, which want to achieve whatever they want to achieve. But of course, politicians and policymakers and business people will need to balance it out, because if not, we'll be locked down as we are in the UK forever.
Do you believe there are still too many planes flying too many passengers out there?
Right now, no, of course not.
Not now, but a year from now.
I think we're going to find a new equilibrium. I think you'll find that there are less planes because many have been retired. There are less airlines, and in the very short term, there's less demand. So I think equilibrium always finds itself here. But I do think that we need to be we haven't talked about sustainability, but our job is, aviation accounts for about 2% of fossil fuel, of CO2 emissions. Right. And we must do this also in a sustainable way, because I think the next generation is expecting that. And in the post-pandemic world, people will I think look deeper into how public companies and companies that have a responsibility treat the health, the safety, the security in the totality of
and
things.
Can you compare a new plane that you recently bought from a CO2 point of view and a 747?
Yes, 30% reduction. 30% reduction. And the best decision that any airline can make in the I would say over the next 10 years is having the youngest fleet in the sky. That is where the biggest savings are, because we must accept that currently, if you're doing long haul travel with hundreds of people, the only source of fuel is still fuel as we know it, jet fuel, and the engines that power them. It will take that technology. Now, sustainable aviation fuel, so fuel derived from sustainable sources, absolutely is the way to go, but that is always a scarce commodity and takes time to really ramp up the production at economical value. So fleets is the thing that we must all do.
Does the passenger care about this?
Yes, they do. Not just the passenger, also the corporations care. I think that we are seeing the ESG funds, we're seeing the custodians, we're seeing the next generation of leaders. I care deeply about it. I know my passengers care about it. I know my family cares about it. So to think that we do not need to take action because this too will pass is a fundamental, not just mistake, but wrong.
Is airline pricing reasonable in terms of the services provided?
It's too cheap.
I've often thought that it's really cheap.
It's too cheap.
I think that's right.
It is too cheap, but that's because there are too many competitors. Well, it's an inefficient market with low barriers to entry. So, like I said, if you want to come for the intellectual challenge, please do. If you want to make a lot of money, please go work for a hedge fund.
Gwen, you look like you have some questions for some students.
We have quite a few questions here, and actually some came in as early as last week. For Shai, does Virgin Atlantic expect to accept Bitcoin as payment for air travel? And do you think that the industry might move in that direction?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And we don't accept yet Bitcoin. I think there is no doubt that we will accept Bitcoin in the future. I do want to say that we toyed with, we did an experiment on Bitcoin, something to do with our treasury function already 3 years ago. We had money that was trapped in a foreign entity and we could not get it out of that country. And I thought that the best way of getting it was buying Bitcoin, and it proved to be correct. So we tried to prove that we could do it. But yeah, I think Bitcoin, and not just Bitcoin, specific currencies need to be accepted. Actually, our job is just to accept any currency that is safe and secure.
There's a question that's popped up several times in different forums, and it's something that you've already started to address. The question deals with the confidence level you at Virgin Atlantic have about passenger numbers returning to pre-COVID levels. And the question also goes on to say, given that business travel is not likely to recover fully, at what point do you think you're going to be fully operational in the new world?
Well, so first of all, fully operational, I expect this to be this year, the back end of this year. I have no doubt that we'll be fully operational. When I mean fully operational, all our planes flying to all our destinations, okay? I do think it takes time to recover. I mentioned that I thought that full recovery of passenger numbers and revenue numbers, probably 2023 and beyond. Actually, and I did mention that I think if you ask yourselves and your families, there is pent up demand, especially if you live in countries like the UK with bad weather, who are not as large as the US, where you can just travel domestically and get in a car or a domestic flight. Travel is a big deal, and people actually want to treat themselves post this awful year, which has probably had an impact on every single one of them on their lives and livelihoods. So I do think that there is a recovery. It will take time. And like I said, the shape is undetermined yet. I totally accept that business travel is going to be the last to recover, which means we need to think about our plane configuration, what types of, how many seats we have. Look, but am I confident that travel returns? Yes, I am. Can I predict every permutation of what happens? No. And that will take a bit of time.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? To what degree could China become a real competitor in the airline business and in the airplane manufacturing business?
Yeah, so airlines, they have fantastic airlines, which were partners, China Eastern, China Southern, Air China, and so forth. In the manufacturing, they have a desire, but manufacturing a plane is not as straightforward. It's not just the design of the plane, it's the logistics, it's the knowledge that your plane is safe. People buy planes and specific planes because of their efficiencies, but ultimately also because of their reliability and knowledge that they are going to do what they're saying that they will do under every circumstance. So I think, would I bet against China of entering manufacturing planes? Of course not. They're already in it. Would I say that Airbus and Boeing right now, especially given the fact that there is a reduction in demand, do I see Boeing and Airbus disappearing from my world? Not at all.
Although the future doesn't look that promising over the near future, at least
Nope.
for Boeing and Airbus.
Yes, but we've also, this industry is a very resilient industry, funnily enough. There is demand for travel, and global world requires travel, again, with absolute necessity to do this in an environmentally way, or the best we can. But a global world requires travel. Connectivity is the thing that unleashes not just vacations, but science and partnerships and family reunions and dealing with difficult situations of, loss of life and so forth, and cargo. So it's an industry that must exist in the global world. Yeah, we'll see how it transforms itself into the next phase.
I'm sorry, Gwen.
It's okay. We have a lot of questions here. We won't get to all of them, but another question that has come up in several forums is the relationship between Virgin Atlantic and the government. And a lot of the students are asking about the relationships with the federal government. So I assume they mean the US government, but I think also that you have the same question would apply to Virgin Atlantic and the UK government.
Yeah, and I think, so the federal government, we don't have a I mean, we have a relationship with the federal government in the US, but we work through our partners Delta in our joint venture. So we have a lot of dealings with them, but that is funneled mostly through our partners Delta and owners. In the UK, I have had a front row seat to the machinations of government under significant duress. The position that our government here has taken is different to most other Western countries in terms of being very clear that industry must mostly in the main, take care of itself. In the beginning, we were looking for a lot of government support, just like was awarded to France, in France, in Germany, and in the US, of course, and in Asia. But we've now done it differently on a privately funded way. In terms of the overall response, it's difficult. Can they do things better? I always tell them, I think they can, but I understand they're dealing with a very difficult situation. But the UK right now, the shining star is the vaccination program, where we've been behind on most other measures. On vaccinations, we're right up there with the UAE and Israel. And I think today we're getting closer to 13 million jabs, and the target is 15 million jabs by the 15th of February, which I think the government will hit. And that is good to see. That's, by the way, that's heritage of totally different to the US, which is a national health service. So it's available to everyone. It's equal to everyone. A very kind of European style approach, which of course is totally different than the US one.
All right, another area where a couple of students have asked questions is along the issue of your employees. During the pandemic, during the quarantine, during your furloughs, were you able to provide any emotional support to your employees?
Fantastic question. It's fatigue management and support for our people is one of the big things. And yes, we do. So we measure religiously Net Promoter Score, which is is how our customers feel about us, and we measure religiously what we call happiness, scientifically. And because if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. I mean, everybody knows that. And I must say, despite it all, and throughout these entire crises, I wouldn't say happiness is the highest, but the belief in the future of Virgin Atlantic, by the way, whether you're on furlough or not, there's a bit of a discrepancy or change or difference. So people on furlough are slightly more hesitant, and people at work are a bit more positive. But overall, we have been able to keep the team together, running and believing. But we do this by talking about the importance of talking to each other, helping and being kind to each other, solving a problem, and all the tools that you would expect. We're talking to experts and reading all the literature. But I think at this point, we've also learned how to do this ourselves. Extra communication, open dialogue. I meet with multiple people in various forums, and so do many colleagues. But it's an ongoing issue. I can't say that it's perfect, but I can say that luckily we have, like I said, the thing that unites us is a very unique workforce that has kept it together and believing in the future.
That's great.
One thing that might help you, Shai, is that I noticed that Pfizer announced this morning that they found ways to cut the manufacturing time from, I think, 110 days to 60 days. So assuming they can get all the raw materials, it sounds like they can produce almost twice as much vaccine than they have.
Yeah, the vaccine is our future. Look, it's not my future or Virgin Atlantic. It's our future, the collective we. And once we get across our differences, which we've seen come to the front in the US elections, in Brexit, and so forth, the one thing that is going to unite us all is that it doesn't care where you're from. And the only way to get through this is through, indeed, the vaccine program.
We are short on time. We just have time for one or two more questions.
Please.
Both of you, Larry and Shai, are graduates of Baruch. Looking back on your time as a student, what advice would have been helpful to you then that might be equally helpful to our current students today? Shai, please go first.
I was actually going to ask Larry to go first because he's the, he's the real alumni here. But if I have to go first, and I'm really eager to hear what Larry has to say. First of all, I want to say that, all of us are lucky that Baruch is around because it provides a very simple mission. For people who work during the daytime to have, and I know there are many people who are doing this daytime, it doesn't change that. But for those working to know that there is a quality education available at nighttime, for those of them who are willing to work hard and sacrifice a few things, it pays back. And so what I would say is, I know it sucks sometimes to be a student and working simultaneously. Just, buckle down and get through this and put the best effort you can into education. I'm a huge believer in the power of education anywhere. And as long as you're curious and hardworking and have the right attitude, Baruch will serve you well.
Thank you, Shai. And Larry, the last word.
I share Shai's admiration for Baruch, as I've said many times. People like Gwen have heard it a million times. No Baruch, no Zicklin. I wouldn't have gone to school without Baruch. But if I had to do it again, I would probably spend more time in the liberal arts at Baruch and not taking that last accounting course. I mean, I always think of myself, I took municipal accounting. Why I was studying municipal accounting, I have no idea. But municipal it was there. Bonds. It was there, and I took it. And I would have read more books and learned more things. And I probably would have worked a little less. I fit in so many courses to take because I got out early and I could go to work. And you don't have a college career when you do that. So I should have reprioritized what I was doing. And I think I would have done it a lot better. But thank God for Baruch.
Hey, thank you both. Very inspiring, very compelling conversation. I want to just briefly mention that our next webinar is a month from today on March 9th. Joining us will be Ms. Deborah Borda, President and CEO of the New York Philharmonic, and Mr. Peter May, Co-Chairman of the Philharmonic. The topic will be the New York Philharmonic Managing Through a Crisis. So we look forward to seeing you all next month. And again, I want to thank you, Shai Weiss and Larry Zicklin, for your conversation and your insights.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.